this together. It is cool to sing praise together. It is cool to pray together. It is always cool and good to read scripture together. And believe it or not, I even enjoy teaching and learning together. And I'm excited about this little mini-series that we're in, because last week we looked at God is bigger than our biggest what? Our biggest problem, right? Some of you have little problems, you barely remember that. God is bigger than our biggest problem. This week, it is God is bigger than your biggest fear. And next week, believe it or not, God is bigger than your biggest dream. Too often, the picture that we have of God is small. It is much more a picture of God in our image than us being made in God's image. And so we end up with a God who is very small, a God who is smaller than our problems, a God who is smaller than our fears, and a God who only casts small dreams. And I believe that God is so much bigger than any of those things. Because the more we stop and pay attention, and the more we allow the scriptures to really penetrate our heart, the more we see how big God is and how much God is at work in the world in the past as well as in the world today. I like talking about fear, though, because fear is something that we can all relate to. It really is. We all know what it is like to be afraid. I look throughout my life. There have been lots of different things that I've been afraid of. One continued theme is bears. By the way, I'm afraid of bears, if anybody didn't know that. And I'm not sure if it's good or bad, but my sister shares the same fear. So there's a little bit of a genetic component there. We're all afraid of bears and snakes. But those have remained consistent. But over the years, they've changed. Thunderstorms used to really bother me. Anybody still afraid of storms? No. Well, maybe a little. And I found a really cool illustration that went along with that line. It was a mom tucking her son into bed in the middle of a really bad thunderstorm. It was dark, and when the lightning would strike, it would just light up the sky, and then when the thunder boomed, it would just shake the house. And Mom was getting ready to turn her son's bedroom light off by the switch, and he said, "Mommy, can you stay here with me tonight?" Mommy said, "No, I'm sorry, honey. I'm going to stay with Daddy in our room." Silence. Just silence. Finally, the little boy said, "The big sissy." Because Daddy needed her. The big sissy. Daddy had to stay. Or she had to stay with Daddy. And then the other one that I loved, and this fit for me for lions and bears pretty close. There were two explorers. They were in a jungle safari. And as they were in the middle of this safari, a ferocious lion jumps out in front of them. The first explorer said to the second, "Remember what the book said. Stand perfectly still. Look the lion right in his eye, and that lion will turn and run." The other man said, "Are you sure that the lion has read the book?" So whether it's thunderstorms, or it's big animals, or it's another problem that we feel like we can't control, we know what it's like to be afraid. Our scripture this morning is found in Numbers chapter 11, and it's Moses. Moses is struggling. He is tired. He is worn. He has some fear because everyone is grumbling, and they're asking for something that he can't deliver. And so if you have your Bibles, let's look this morning in Numbers chapter 11. And I know what it's like to be in over your head. I can relate to Moses being in over his head. He has followed God. He has trusted God. But here they are in the middle of the wilderness, and things aren't going so well. Not everybody is as happy as he thought they would be after being delivered from bondage. And so he's in over his head, and he goes to God in prayer. And this is what we read in Numbers chapter 11, starting with verse 4. "The rabble with them began to crave other food. And again the Israelites started wailing and said," they were whining once again. The Israelites, the great complainers, were whining once again. And they said, "If only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost. Also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna. Just a little reminder, where did the manna come from? God was providing the manna fresh every morning, right? So God was bringing them manna. And where were they at when they were in Egypt? They were slaves. They were in bondage. And what they're saying is, boy, we had it so much better back in Egypt. Think of all the stuff we had for free. It doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? Not a really good place. And they're saying we would rather have that stuff in bondage than we would rather have in freedom. The stuff provided by the Egyptians rather than what's provided with God. So verse 7, the manna was like coriander seed and looked like resin. The people went out around gathering it and then ground it in a hand mill or crushed it in a mortar. They cooked it in a pot or made it into cakes, and it tasted like something made with olive oil. When the dew settled on the camp at night, the manna also came down. Moses heard the people of every family wailing, each at the entrance of his tent. And the Lord became exceedingly angry, and Moses was troubled. He asked the Lord, "Why have you brought this trouble on your servant? What have I done to displease you so much that you would put the burden of all of these people on me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I give them birth? Why do you tell me to carry them in my arms as a nurse carries an infant to the land you promised on oath to their forefathers? Where can I get meat for all of these people? They keep wailing to me, 'Give us meat to eat.' I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me. If this is how you are going to treat me, put me to death right now. If I have found favor in your eyes, and do not let me face my own ruin." That is how bad Moses' problems are at this moment. Pretty bad, right? The Lord said to Moses, "Bring me 70 of Israel's elders who are known to you as leaders and officials among the people. Have them come to the tent of meeting that they may stand there with you. I will come down and speak with you there, and I will take the spirit that is on you and put the spirit on them. They will help you carry the burden of the people so that you will not have to carry it alone. Tell the people, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow, when you will eat meat. The Lord heard when you wailed. If only we had meat to eat, we were better off in Egypt. Now the Lord will give you meat, and you will eat it." Well, I tell my kids that. You will not eat it for just 1 day, or 2 days, or 5, 10, or 20 days, but for a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils and you loathe it. Because you have rejected the Lord who is among you, and have wailed before him, saying, "Why did we ever leave Egypt?" But Moses said, "Here I am among 600,000 men on foot, and you say, 'I will give them meat to eat for a whole month.' Would they have enough if flocks and herds were slaughtered for them? Would they have enough if all the fish in the sea were caught for them?" The Lord answered Moses, "Is the Lord's arm too short? You will now see whether or not what I say will come true for you." Don't close your Bibles. We're going to reference back to it. We're going to pick up a couple verses later. But here Moses is. He's in over his head. He's at the end of his rope. He's had enough. He just can't take anymore. And he goes to complain to God because everyone's complaining to him. I mean, really, who else is Moses going to go to? There is no one else that he can really share his burdens to. And so he goes to God. And I don't think God gave the answer Moses was looking for. I think Moses was hoping that God would pat him and say, "You're right, man, are they bad? I'm just going to let you off the hook. Tonight, under the cover of darkness, you can sneak out of camp and never worry about them again." Because when we are afraid, when we are dealing with stuff that's in over our head, escape is one of the number one options. Get me out of here. I no longer want to deal with this. And on this particular day, the complaining must have been so bad about all of their hardships that they had completely forgotten how hard it was in Egypt. Now, I don't want to be too hard on the Israelites because we've done this. I have done this, and I bet you have done this. We complain about our current circumstances and wish for the good old days. Now, the good old days aren't always so good. And many of you who said, just wait with your kids, it'll get better, some of it did, some of it didn't. There's still some themes that continue. There's still some themes that become a struggle. They had forgotten that the food that they had in Egypt, it wasn't free. It came at a tremendous price, the price of their freedom, where they had to do back-breaking hard labor. They could never do what they wanted. They were under persecution. They were under the rule of a tyrant. It wasn't free. And somehow they preferred that to what God provided. And again, I'd love to beat the Israelites up, but man, we've all been there. We've all thought, well, if only I could go back, maybe it wasn't so bad. You know, God, this new spot that I'm in, it's not so easy. There's a lot of complaining. There's a lot of new problems that I didn't quite anticipate. And one of the first things that we take away from Moses in this moment, he's completely honest with God. He's fed up. He's had enough. I think he's a little bit afraid because everyone is turning to him saying, Moses, fix our problem. What are we going to do? We haven't had meat in forever. I'm so tired of eating this. I can't take one more bite of manna. What am I going to do? And it's all of this problem solving. And they weren't just looking for a kind ear. They were looking to Moses and saying, Moses, solve our problems. And when you are in that situation where everyone looks at you, where you feel like people are counting and dependent upon you, the fear grows. What am I going to do? How am I going to fix this? How am I going to solve this? Because right now I don't know the answer. And I love that Moses, maybe because he had no one else, maybe because he didn't know what else to do, but he goes right to God and he is completely honest with God. God, I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for all of these people. I didn't ask to provide food for them. I didn't ask to carry them. God, you asked me to do this. And so it's fear and frustration coming out all at once. As Moses lays this out for God, God, I am afraid. I wish you would just take me out of it. This burden is too heavy. I have never walked in Moses' sandals. Bet you haven't either. But I know what it's like to have a burden that's too heavy for me. I know what it's like when people look at you and say, what are we going to do? And to not know. I know what it's like to say, I don't know where else to go. And so one of the best places that we can go to is actually to God. And that's what we see Moses do. And he lays it all down. He's completely honest with God. And I love that the scripture doesn't clean up the anger in Moses. Because we have this history of making things look a little better than what they usually do. We embellish. In scriptural terms, it's called redaction. It's where we tweak something a little bit so it doesn't look quite so bad. What I love is that that this was left here. We see the anger and the frustration and the fear and everything that Moses has as he pours it out before God. You're almost waiting for the big, God, this is your fault. He says it in quite a roundabout way, right? You brought us here. You asked me to do this. I tried to say, I'm not skilled, God. If you remember back to God calling Moses, I'm not skilled to do all this. Well, here it is, God. I told you I couldn't do this. And now your people are complaining again. God, you're going to have to do something. And so Moses is completely honest with God, laying it all out there, the frustration, the fear. And I don't know what Moses was expecting, but I doubt it was God's answer. So if you're going to be honest with God, you better be ready for God to respond. That does not mean that God will respond the way you want it. We kind of get what Moses' preferred answer was. God, escape plan, please. Life, death, whatever it is, get me out of here. I say be ready for God's response, but doesn't that sound impossible? There was no way that Moses was prepared for what God gave him as an answer. He was thinking, I'll die, it'll work. It's a good plan. God says, I will give them meat for a month. That was nowhere on Moses' radar. It wasn't even a dream far down the road, because it's a very simple reason. Did you catch how many men Moses said they had with him on foot? 600,000. Keep in mind that when the Israelites came out of Egypt, it was a trail of people miles long. We're not talking 15, 20 people. And so Moses tries to do something we have all done. He tries to wrap his head around God's answer. And he's like, God, I don't know how you do math, but the way we do it here, 600,000 miles, that's a lot of miles. And we're not talking one day, God. I mean, I could maybe see you doing something one day. But God, for a month? And so Moses responds with the exact same thing that we would respond with. Okay, God, where's it coming from? We're going to slaughter all the flocks? You're going to drain the sea? Let us pick up fish there? Be ready for God's answer. Moses wasn't. Usually we aren't either. But Moses' answer that he received from God actually covered everything that he had complained about to God. He said the burden is too heavy. So what was the first part that God said in here? Bring me 70 leaders. Bring me 70 leaders and officials who are known throughout the group of people, and I will share the burden that you have with them. That was an answered prayer. Moses said, I just can't keep going. I absolutely need help. And God said, okay, you will have help. Bring me 70. I will pour the Spirit on them. And what I didn't read here, some of them began prophesying, and it was an amazing time. 2 of them went out and prophesied throughout the group of people, and some of them were concerned. What's going on here, God? Moses said, don't stop them. God is at work. Don't stop them. That part was good. That part we understand. We know what it's like to share the burden, because if we have heavy stuff to lift, what do? We team lift, right? If we have a lot of stuff to move, or we have a lot of things to do, we ask for help. We call our friends, maybe those who we know want to help and those who owe us. We ask for help. We understand sharing that kind of burden. And so I think that Moses was pleased with that part. It was when God continued on that Moses began to have trouble with God's answer. And Moses begins stuttering again, which he did naturally as well as in prayer, I think, because we would stutter as well if God told us that he was about to provide meat for a month for 600,000 men. God, how is that going to happen? How is that possible? Because don't forget, we're in the middle of the desert. We're not surrounded by ranches. We're not surrounded by tons of flocks and wild animals and the woods where we can go in and get the meat. We're in the middle of the desert. How is this going to happen? Moses' response, would they have enough if flocks and herds were slaughtered for them? Would they have enough if all the fish in the sea, all of the fish in the sea, were caught for them? And you know what the implied answer is? No. Even that wouldn't be enough, God. And in true godly fashion, God doesn't defend his answer. He doesn't. He doesn't say, this is how I'm going to do it. He doesn't explain it and say, well, get ready. I'm going to teach you about refrigeration. I'm going to show you how this is going to happen. God doesn't defend his answer or his promise. He doesn't give the details. God responds with, Moses, are you saying that my arm is too short? Now, Johnny referenced that in prayer, but it's not a phrase that we use everyday language. We don't talk about our arms being too short, or we don't often talk about God's arm being too short, but that is a reference to God's power. And if you read back through Exodus, through the Israelites being released, all of the miracles that were done, or all of the plagues that were performed, were done with God's finger. And so when we bump up from God's finger doing this, are you saying that my arm is too short? Moses, are you saying that I can't do this? Well, no, God, I'm not saying you can't. I'm not saying you can't. I would never say that. Of course you can. I just don't understand the how. Because the way I do math, God, it doesn't add up. It doesn't work. Moses, do you think I can do this? It's a question we all need to wrestle with. Because if we're going to say that God is bigger than our biggest fear, then we better have a big God. I meant what I said at the beginning. So often, God, in our eyes, is no bigger than us. And that's a God who's not bigger than our fears. We need a God who is bigger than us, who will take us to places that we never dreamed, because Moses never dreamed that God would supply this much meat, or that God could, because in his eyes there was absolutely no way. So we have Moses wrestling with the question, is God's arm too short? Let's look at verses 31 and 32. Now a wind went out from the Lord and drove quail in from the sea. It brought them down all around the camp to about 3 feet above the ground, as far as a day's walk in any direction. All that day and night and all the next day the people went out and gathered quail. No one gathered less than 10 homers. Then they spread them out all around the camp. If you're going to go and be honest with God, and you are going to try and accept God's answer, then you better be ready to trust God. And you better be ready to move, no matter what. I love, Moses goes out and he tells the people everything that God said. I wonder if on his venture away from God, as he's about to meet the people, if he thought, should I tell them the whole answer? Because they're going to think I'm crazy if I tell them there's meat coming for the next month, and they're going to string me up if I don't deliver. Do I just say, hey, God wants 70 leaders, they're going to help? Or do I say, God wants 70 leaders, and God is about to provide meat for a month? He decides to trust God. He decides to take God up on his offer, that God's arm is not too short, and he goes out. He tells the people what the Lord had said. And a supernatural wind drove the quail inland. Quail like to be near the sea. They like to be near the water. They don't fly that far. And so imagine if the wind had been opposing them instead of dragging them. It wouldn't have happened. They probably wouldn't have got there on their own. This supernatural, this God-inspired wind brings the quail from where they were to where they are. And some of them are flying high, some of them are flying low, which means look out. And did you catch how far out the quail landed? 15 miles, which was a day's walk in any direction. You know how far 15 miles is?
Yeah, from here to Cambridge.
From here to Cambridge Springs. From here almost down to the Sandy Lake exit, just short of that. From here just short of the Edinburgh exit. Think about that. Imagine 3 feet of quail. That's about here. From here to Edinburgh. That's hard to imagine. And imagine turning around and going south, because some of us are going to go north, some of us are going to go south. Imagine 3 feet of quail from here all the way to Sandy Lake. Or 3 feet from here heading towards Espyville, or heading, not to Titusville, but at least on the other side of Meadville. Sometimes it seems like it's 15 miles on the other side of Meadville. Imagine 3 feet of quail in any direction you walk. 15 miles. That sounds almost impossible to comprehend, doesn't it? If you do the math, 15 miles in any direction, so that would be your radius. Square that, multiply times pi. Aren't you impressed? I totally looked that up. You would get roughly 700 square miles covered in quail. It's a lot of quail. in the middle of the desert where it shouldn't be.
Yes, no, great.
You know, I believe that it was fine. I believe that it was fine because when God supplied manna for the Sabbath, that manna didn't stink and there were no maggots. When they tried to take manna for their own so that they didn't have to work the next day, it stunk and there were maggots. So I believe that if God brought the quail in and covered 700 square miles of it, that God also protected the odor and made sure that that meat would keep so that they could eat it for the next 30 days, which is what they had been grumbling and complaining about. And Moses didn't think that God would do anything about it. I think he thought he might get some help. They could come up with some human answers, and they would find a way to calm the people back down. And find a way to alleviate the fear and all the concerns and the anxiety that he had. And what God did was cover everywhere they looked with manna and quail. It's amazing, isn't it? You know, it was impossible for everyone who saw that quail storm to forget it. Wasn't it? Imagine one day walking around in quail, no matter where you go. It would leave a lifetime impression for generations. And sometimes I wish that God would just deliver a quail storm-like miracle every time we have a problem, so that we would remember that, so that we would know and be able to trust God. But let's be honest, that's not how God responds. God doesn't always deliver a quail storm every time we ask, but it sure doesn't mean God couldn't. The problem with being afraid and the problem with trusting God is that we can't always predict what God is going to do. We can't always predict the way that, in fact, I'm going to go out on a limb, we almost never get it right. We almost never predict what God is going to do. We might get a part of it or a piece of it or a little glimpse, but God does something so much bigger than we ever expect that rarely do we ever get the whole picture of what God is doing. But I love that God just met their needs. He met their needs. He met their concerns. He met Moses' needs, his concerns. And it reminds me, and I hope it reminds you as we look at the story, that no matter our fear, no matter how big it seems to us, no matter how impossible it seems, we have a God who loves us and who can do immeasurably more than we could ever ask or expect or anticipate, or possibly dream of. And God is always bigger and better than anything we could ask for. And so I want to leave you with something today, one little part that I want you to take. If you take nothing else other than the quail storm, and I am going to steal a phrase from Mark Patterson, Quail-mageddon. If you remember nothing other than Quail-mageddon, you'll remember that, right? The next time you are afraid, the next time you have a problem, Quail-mageddon. If you remember nothing other than that, take this away. Sometimes God calms the storm. Sometimes God lets the storm rage and He calms us. They're both good answers. No matter how afraid we are, no matter what the circumstance is, no matter what we are thinking we're going to do, and we have no idea what God is going to do, sometimes He calms the storm, and sometimes He lets it rage, and He calms us. And I'd encourage you today to do something different than what we typically do. Take a lesson from Moses and to seek God instead of just seeking the solution. No matter the problem, seek God instead of just seeking the solution. It's a much better plan because even when our problems are big, our answers are often small. And God has this way of doing something bigger and better and completely off our radar than we could ever imagine. Let's close in prayer today. God, we thank you for this time together. We thank you that as we read back through these Old Testament stories, that we see you at work. That God, I can't imagine 700 square miles covered in quail. And yet the scriptures tell us that's exactly what happened. But God, I can't also imagine feeding 600,000 men for a month. And yet, God, for you, it was done instantly. God, there is nothing that is too big for you. Forgive us for having such a small opinion and a small view of you. God, forgive us for making you in our image instead of allowing you to make us in your image. God, we thank you for today. We thank you for this time together. And God, I just pray for each person who's here. God, I pray for the different problems that are represented, the different fears that we have throughout the congregation, the different concerns in our heart, God, that just everything that is going on, God, whether it is a health need, a financial need, a spiritual need, a job need, a home need, a community need, God, whatever it is, whatever is burdening our heart that we are so worried about, God, forgive us for looking at such small interests. And God, help us to trust you and to be ready to take your full answer, not just the part we want to hear. God, thank you for the way you love us, and thank you for the way you are with us each and every day. And God, thank you for being bigger than us and doing way more than we could ever imagine. It's in Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.